Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us. Today, my guest is a man who is into all sorts of the unknown and the weird and wonderful things that the world has to offer. We have Mr. Dave Partridge. Hello, sir.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm not bad.
Good.
So, you have come to light from the marvellous Simon Bradley. I got his name right this time.
You did?
Can call him Bradshaw. And he put me on to you talking about your magazine, Shadows of Your Mind.
Yes.
So
yes, he did mention it.
He did. So would you like to give people who aren't familiar with it a little bit of a background of what it is and how it came to be?
Yeah. Right. Well, Shadows of Your Mind is an online magazine which is available to read and download absolutely free. And it basically focuses on my interests, which is ufology and the paranormal, ancient mysteries, cryptozoology, and things like that. How it came about is a very long-winded story, so probably not the best time to tell you that.
That's
but
right.
It just stemmed out of me being interested in all these subjects, digesting a load of YouTube videos, radio podcasts, reading a load of books, and just trying to make sense of all the information that I was learning. Because I've had a deep-seated interest since childhood about UFOs, from seeing Carl Sagan's Cosmos book and his series. And there was a chapter on, is there extraterrestrial life in the universe? And there's 3 little images of artist illustrations of these little critters that may or may not exist from somewhere else. One was a little gremlin dude, there was a little bold grey dude, and the other one looked like one of those hairballs from Critters.
Oh, yeah.
The movie from the 80s. So there was a few other photos of, is this a UFO? Are flying saucers visiting the Earth? So I kind of had an interest throughout childhood, teenage years, left it alone for a little bit while I concentrated on heavy metal.
Well done.
And H.P. Lovecraft, as most young adults do, especially male adults.
It's a good combination. Metal
it is.
and Lovecraft.
It was Metallica that got me into Lovecraft, funnily enough.
Ah.
Then Ride the Lightning.
Ah, what an album.
Yeah. Call of Cthulhu. That was 9 minutes of pure joy. But then, from there I joined the company that I work for at the moment, and there was 2 guys there who just happened to be into the same thing. We started chatting, and that's where I started kind of redigesting everything, reading a lot more books, reading PDFs online, articles, then listening. And I've got a background in magazine design, about almost 25 years of that. I thought, well, why don't I just put it in a magazine? That'd be great, because it's a way for me to compact all the information and an easier way for me to learn about it. But then I'm also sharing this information with people who might not know.
Yeah.
And making it free, which, it's a rubbish business model for a magazine. But I thought, this information's got to be, I want it to be out there.
Yeah.
And if it's free, then people are more likely to read it. So that's where it stemmed from, basically. I have no idea where the title came from. I'm still trying to remember that one.
Oh, it's a good title, and I'm going to blow smoke up your ass again, as I did in the intro before we started talking. But it's a really beautiful looking magazine. It's really eye-catching, really interesting articles in there, so you can definitely see where it's come from good stock. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah. I think after 25 years, I should be able to put a couple of pages together and make them look nice. But
exactly,
it's moving pictures and words about on a screen, essentially.
We've had Jeremy Donovan say, "Great to hear Dave speak about this subject. He's a legend."
Cheers, Joe.
Excellent. So nice endorsement there. So, when it comes to something like this, I mean, there is so much information out there. There's a lot of misinformation. Yeah. How do you even begin to kind of sift through what you think is credible, and sort of what's your process for doing that?
Well, first off, there has to be documented evidence. that's usually the number one thing to look out for. If it hasn't got documented evidence, then you have to kind of dig a little bit deeper and find out where this information is coming from. I mean, to paraphrase, I think it was Carl Sagan, extraordinary
claims need extraordinary evidence, something along those lines?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, that's true. I mean, the actual topic of ufology is so broad and vast. There's lots of different subcategories to it as well.
Yeah.
And you got UFOs, you got USOs, which are unidentified submersible objects. You got the whole consciousness paradigm that goes with everything like that. You got time travel, exoplanets. I mean, and that's just scratching the kind of the surface of the UFO subject itself. When you start getting into contactees, abductions, military projects, top secret access programs, black budgets, things like that, that's where the information isn't quite readily available. So, you kind of have to try and find people who do know about it. People who have done the groundwork beforehand, and then just try and make up your own mind from there. I mean, there is a lot of people out there who will provide disinformation, misinformation. There's a lot of charlatans out there, people who are willing to take your money without giving you anything in return, except for false promises and hopium, they call it. But I mean, once you find the researchers who actually know about the stuff, who have spoken to people at military level, then you kind of get a feeling of who to talk to, what kind of information you're looking at. Yeah.
So, sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
So we'll get onto those, like other people's evidence and everything in a minute. What about your own? Have you had any own? We'll start with maybe any personal experiences that you may have had.
I've yet to see anything in the sky. Everything that I've seen in the sky, I guess, whether that's, a flock of seagulls, military vehicles, because I used to live near Keevil Airfield in Wiltshire, so there was a lot of back and forth, because you had Warden Bassett around there and Lynham.
Yeah. So
you kind of got the old Chinooks flying over late at night, then you got the traffic helicopters, you got commercial planes. You kind of get a feeling, you can tell what are commercial aircraft, what are man-made aircraft.
Yeah.
Just for the navigation lights. But I have never seen anything I can't explain in the skies.
So what about, because one of the things that came out recently, that it sort of came out, and I know I spoke to a friend of mine the other day about this, wasn't it American Air Force footage, was it, that was released documenting sort of various UFO footage? It came out very sort of under the radar. There wasn't a big fuss made about it.
In certain circles, there was a hell of a fuss.
Oh, okay.
You were talking about the USS Nimitz incidents of 2004, and also the USS Princeton or Roosevelt. That happened on separate coasts of America. The USS Nimitz was involved in a naval training exercise off the Southern California coast near Catalina Island. And for a week during this exercise, they kept seeing these craft in the sky. I mean, these craft, they look like, they've been described as Tic Tacs.
Okay.
So if you imagine a giant Tic Tac buzzing around you, and they sent all these jet fighters to go and try and intercept, or just to go up and have a look to see what was going on. And the videos that were released were from the gun camera, gun cameras at the front of the plane, or the FLIR, the infrared cameras as well.
Yeah.
And you had these craft being tracked on the radar. You had people on the deck of these ships. I mean, it wasn't just the Nimitz. The Nimitz is from where the jet fighters were scrambled. But you got all these other ships in the area who were seeing the same kind of thing. It's on radar as well. So you've got these military trained observers seeing these things in the sky that they can't explain for the best part of a week. And there was one incident where one of the Tic Tacs, it was flying past the noses of the fighters, and it actually met with something that was coming up from the surface of the ocean.
Right.
Which is quite incredible, because you don't think, if you've seen something in the air, you don't think there's going to be something coming up from the ocean to meet it.
No.
So there's 3 videos that were released unofficially through sources who used to work at the Pentagon, who have since been found out. It's Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo, who are now part of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is the company that Tom DeLonge, the old Blink-182 singer, he set up. So he started that company up in 2017. Then about 2 months after, these videos appeared. They made front page news in the New York Post. Sorry, not the New York Post, New York Times. And then from there, they went to the New York Post, Politico, Washington Post. And, those videos kind of spread around the world, and they're quite famous. They're called Gimbal, Go Fast, and can't remember the other one. There's 3 videos. There's one video, the Go Fast one. You got this Tic Tac going not far above the surface of the water, and you've got these trained jet pilots, and they're trying to get a lock on this object as it's going, because it's flying like faster than anything they've ever seen before. Yeah. And when they do finally get it, they actually get a weapons lock on it. It's like, whoa, we actually did it. How did we manage to do that? But you've got all these people who've seen this, and they've recently started speaking about it, because last year the Pentagon did say, yes, these videos actually happened. They are from us. They do contain vehicles that we can't explain. Right. People who try to debunk them call them cold seagulls. Call them, is it Russian tech? Is it Chinese tech? Is it secret American, technology that they're testing out in a live scenario with their own, with their own naval forces? Yeah. But these things defy, the laws of Earth physics as we know it. Yeah. They don't, they can drop from 50,000 feet to, 50 feet above the water in the blink of an eye. Now, if you can tell me what kind of man-made craft can do that, then, it's quite bizarre to think that there is something like that flying around with abandon around, in our skies, whether it be over America or South America, Europe. There was a case in 1952, 53. It was called Exercise Main Brace, which was a naval exercise, NATO exercise up off the coast of Norway. And they kind of saw similar things. They got buzzed by UFOs. There was unidentified submersible objects that were coming up as well. And all this was hushed up. This is a NATO exercise, which you'd think something like that, obviously, there's national security concerns involved. But the fact that you've got NATO on an exercise trying to prepare for any war against Russia, because we're talking about the height of the Cold War here. Yeah. They're suddenly thinking, have the Russians suddenly got all this advanced tech that we haven't? Have we been leapfrogged technologically? And, are we going to end up in a war with something that we got no way of fighting back against? Yeah. So, with up to sort of current day, I suppose this is sort of would you say this is one of the first times that a government has actually acknowledged that this has come from us, this is something worth of note? Or has there been, in your eyes, from everything that you've researched, has there been other really, really compelling evidence and arguments? Well, I take it you've heard about the Roswell incident, 1947, where that made front page news. US Air Force captures flying saucer, and then the next day, no, it was a weather balloon. It was a secret mobile balloon that we were testing out, and it was just balsa wood and tin foil.
Right.
Well, the following year, 1948, the US government set up Project Sign, or Project Sorcerer was originally known, but then went into Project Sign, which was their investigation of flying saucers, because Roswell happened late June, early July. Prior to that, about a week before, a civilian pilot called Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington State. He was looking for a crashed military aircraft. And he saw out of his window 9 boomerang-shaped objects. And he calculated that the speed they were going, they could not have been man-made or of this earth or any technology that we had back in 1947.
Right.
So obviously the US was concerned about this. They started Project Saucer Sign, which then became Project Grudge, which then became Project Blue Book, which is the famous one. It's been more well known at the moment because there was a television series based on Project Blue Book, which has aired on SyFy channel quite recently. There's been 2 series worth. That was headed up by Captain Edward Ruppelt and Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Now, Hynek was a skeptic to begin with. He was an astronomer at Ohio State University. He got called in by the Air Force just to investigate a couple of cases to see what he could make of them. And then they started building up a big portfolio of, people making flying saucer reports, basically. There was no real way for them to report what was going on except for, to the local police, local sheriffs, who then ended up passing it on to the Air Force. And so all this was kind of set up. So it carried on until the 1960s when it was shut down. Basically, the government wanted it all to be hushed up because they didn't think that it was in the public interests for them to know about this, and they didn't want to unnecessarily panic the American public if they couldn't work out what it was, which they still don't. But that program kind of went underground for a bit. Then it ended up being called ATIP, which is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And that was the subject of the newspaper report in December 2017, which the front page of the New York Times, which said that the American government had spent $22 billion on investigating UFOs. And this has all been done in a black budget, wasn't accounted for in any of the audits.
Right.
And this was pretty big news. So apparently ATIP had been shut down in 2012. They weren't investigating UFOs anymore, but they had been.
Right.
And then we find out in 2017 that this program had been ongoing, and it still is ongoing. I mean, as recently as August the 14th this year, the Department of Defense came out with a press release saying, we have established a UAP task force. A UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, is the name they give to UFOs because UFOs got such a stigma with it.
Yeah.
So this UAP task force has been set up, previously called something else, but in the last few days as well, it's been confirmed that the Japanese government will be working in tandem with them. So they'll be sharing data, and I'm pretty sure, the Canadians have lots of reports as well. The UK are working with the American Space Force, but whether they're going to be working in tandem on this task force is unclear yet. But, these sightings have continued for years, and there's they're historical as well. They're mentioned in the Bible, ancient texts, they're everywhere. And, for what is possibly the biggest story in our human evolution up to this point to be covered up or kept secret, when people probably should be interested that there are these craft coming from, whether they're coming from other galaxies, other parts of the universe, or whether they are actually us from the future, which is a point that's always brought up as well. Some point in the future, have we learned how to time travel? Are we coming back to try and warn ourselves about what we're doing?
So it's time, with all the science obviously we have now and our understanding of time as it is, do you feel that time travel is a possibility? I mean, there's, obviously with time travel there is so much that can go wrong. Or is it the whole idea of, say, parallel dimensions, multiple time strings, those kind of ideas?
I think those ideas are becoming more accepted these days, especially in mainstream academia and science. 5 years ago, if you mentioned something about time travel, you go, yeah, Star Trek, Quantum Leap, whatever.
Red Dwarf.
yeah. But there was a Mexican guy called Miguel Alcubierre who wrote a paper in 1994 basically saying that faster than light travel was possible, and he was kind of validating something that Einstein had been talking about, back in the whenever he said that.
Was it 40s, 60s? I can't remember with Einstein now.
No, he's always one of those people. He seems to have lived for so long that you never remember which decade he was saying what. Yeah,
you felt like he's lived at least 200 years.
Yeah, exactly. He probably has.
Yeah.
And he came back, and then he's gone again. A bit like Elvis.
Oh, Elvis is always around. Even though he'd probably be, in his 90s, 100 years, something like that.
Wasn't it his 90th birthday recently?
I'm sure he still looks exactly the same as everyone claims he does.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just Kurt Russell, really.
Yeah. But, so again, it's one of those things that, is it, when it comes to these kind of subjects, obviously our science is limited to what we know about the universe. We're always constantly learning new things, as we were talking about as well before we started broadcasting about the discovery on Venus, finding, was it sulfuric acid?
Yeah, it was the gas phosphine that was found in sulfuric acid clouds of Venus. Phosphine only, as far as we know, it's only created by decaying organic matter or, made artificially in a lab. Yeah. So that was pretty big news.
I mean, that we could understand because we can relate some of our own science to that idea. But when it comes to, obviously, you're talking about concepts that we sort of could dream of, but we have no science to back it up. I can't remember who said it. It was somebody talking about the idea of, if you imagine like the dimensions we live in and the universe and everything around us is a sphere, and works on however many dimensions, and we are only capable of observing. Is it we can only work in 3 dimensions? Is it, or 4?
Yeah, we're on. Yeah, it's basically a 3D world. Unless you believe in flat Earth, then it's a 2D world.
Do we go down that road?
No, I'm not going down that road.
No.
The Vikings disproved that anyway.
Yeah, there we go. If it's good enough for Vikings, it's good enough for us.
Absolutely.
But so therefore, if the universe does operate in more dimensions, they said in this sphere we would only be able to see almost just a sliver of what is going on in the reality of what we live in. So we can't comprehend all the other things that are going on around us at the time.
No, we can't. And basically, most of us would probably want it to stay that way as well. If you can see in I don't know if you've seen the film Valerian, City of a Thousand Planets.
No, I haven't actually.
It was done by Luc Besson a few years ago. It features Cara Delevingne.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically that was part of the concept of that film. Was they end up in the middle of this desert, there's nothing there, they're given these special glasses, and then suddenly they can see these hidden dimensions, and there's like a whole marketplace, a whole bazaar of different creatures and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it's definitely possible that we are living in a multi-dimensional sphere, as you call it, or holographic universes have been mooted. We're living in a simulation like the Matrix. That's also one of the theories. But there's nothing to say that because we can only see in a certain spectrum, we're only aware of things in a certain spectrum with regards frequencies, radio frequencies, light frequencies, that something in the ultraviolet spectrum or the infrared, there could be a whole crowd of people standing around you watching you speak to me. I could have a load of interdimensional groupies behind me watching you. But
if
you don't
only.
know. Oh, yeah. But it's one of those things that I don't want to try and get my head around, because my head will just explode.
Well, yeah, there's only so much us mere mortals can comprehend, isn't there, when it comes to such things?
I mean, we have a sense that if we can see it, touch it, feel it, taste it, hear it, it exists.
Yeah.
If we can't categorize it into any of those things, then it doesn't exist.
Do you think with the whole idea of like parallel dimensions and multidimensional existence, is that where you can creep into the paranormal aspect of things?
Yeah, you can. Because these are, spirits or energy that is working on a different wavelength to us. And it's why children can sometimes see things that we can't, because they're more perceptive as they're growing up. That's why you'll get a 3-year-old standing at the bottom of the stairs and you'll ask, what are you looking at? And they'll point upstairs and they go, oh, there's a man up there.
Mm.
Or, they'll see, like a horse and carriage driving down the road where there's nothing.
Yeah.
But then as they get older, their perception kind of narrows a bit more and they end up kind of losing that ability, although some people do retain that.
Because I remember I was watching Brian Cox talk. I think it was I was a fan of the Infinite Monkey Cage podcast.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the paranormal and ghosts and everything. And I've always had quite an interest in that kind of thing as well. But again, you sort of have to take it with the evidence and understand the fallibility of the human mind, how we can perceive things, how we're very quick to jump to certain biases and sort of predetermined ideals that we have. But there must be, whether it, like some people claim it's just it's a hallucination or it's a trick of the mind, but there must be something in it because of how often it happens to human beings.
Yeah.
So it can't just be it's not all pure circumstance.
It's not. I mean, you get, certain people are called sensitives. They're more aware of what's going on around them. We reflex. When the hairs stand up on the back of your neck or your arm, or you just get that gut feeling that something's not right. That might be because there's something right next to you, or something's happening in your vicinity which you aren't aware of.
Yeah.
But because we live in, because we're only perceptive to those frequencies that we're used to, we're not going to readily recognize what's going on.
Yeah.
You get things like the Enfield haunting, or people see, which was a lot of poltergeist activity down in London in the 70s. Or you get the Bothell House in Seattle, which a guy experienced high levels of paranormal activity. There's scratches on the wall, there's bangs from upstairs, doors slamming, objects being moved. And it's this kind of thing. The paranormal is just one of those things that happens more or less when you don't obviously when you don't expect it. But it's one of those things that is happening kind of somewhere else, in a different realm, on a different plane, in a different dimension, but it still affects us because some points on the Earth, what they call the veil is slightly thinner. And that's it relates to the magnetism of the Earth in some ways as well.
Do we have any evidence that would support those kind of theories, or is it still at a sort of conjecture idea kind of stage?
A lot of it is well, kind of is conjecture and it isn't. There are studies done, but these studies never get peer reviewed properly because academia doesn't take the subject seriously, which is a problem. Although, moving forward in the next 5, 10 years, 15 years, the next generation of physicists and scientists and, people will be more interested in looking at, multidimensional options and whether we will be able to kind of transcend them and see what we can't see at the moment.
There does seem to be, from listening to sort of history podcasts and watching documentaries, sort of going back over the years and the centuries, that with science, I mean, I'm a big science fan. Science has given us pretty much everything we have today. I absolutely love it to bits. But there does seem to be that element where, with certain ideas, they are disregarded until something comes up that almost scientists can't ignore. So it even if the idea has been talked about for ages, it gets poo-pooed quite a lot, and then all of a sudden someone will come out with something. Look, there's this. You cannot ignore this anymore. And then they're finally kind of, oh, all right, okay, if we have to, and that seems to be where the big jumps happen.
They do. I mean, if you remember 20 years ago, dinosaurs were still, they still evolved from lizards. Yeah. Sorry, not 20, 30 years ago. We're 2020 now, aren't we? Yeah, so pre-Jurassic Park, dinosaurs came from lizards. That was the common theory. And then, it wasn't Jurassic Park, they said dinosaurs came from birds. But before that, there was a shifting of the scientific collective mind that dinosaurs perhaps didn't come from lizards, but they came from birds instead. And that is now the accepted hypothesis. Yeah. As we saw earlier this week on the clouds of Venus, there's particles which we can't explain. They discovered those 2 years ago.
That long ago?
That long ago. I think, yeah. But they couldn't get... They used a telescope in Hawaii, found the data from that, thought, well, this possibly can't be right. We need to get another telescope to confirm this. So they got one in Chile, I think it's in the Atacama Desert, and they were getting similar readings. So it took 18 months for that data to be examined, researched, corroborated, until they were ready to make the announcement that they did last Monday.
Well, I suppose that's understandable, isn't it? If you are going, I mean, part of the scientific method is to test, retest again. Obviously, having things, peer reviewed, try and disprove what you found. So the last thing you want to do is make a massive, bold claim and then get shot down by every other scientist on the planet.
Exactly, which is why you can't really apply the scientific method to UFOs. Yeah. Because we got no way of testing it. No. They're not... They don't behave in a manner that we want. Basically, they're not going to play ball with us while we poke them with sticks and say, "Oh, can you do this? Can you do that? How do you fly that fast? Where have you come from? What? How is your vehicle propelled?" Obviously, we're assuming that there's a pilot in there. Yeah. Which there may not be. That's another thing that's come out recently is these craft might actually be organic. Which is quite trippy if you think about it.
Just a tad.
Yeah, but you don't want to think about it on it too long because then, you go off into somewhere else.
I don't know if you've ever read... I'm presuming you're a sci-fi fan.
Yeah.
Have you ever... there's a series of books, I think it's Expedition Force. I can't remember the name of the author.
I haven't read those, no.
I'll have to send you a link. For anyone who out there, please look up Expedition Force and tell us who the author is, because I can't remember. But that is along those subjects of aliens coming to Earth. But the fact is that their technology and their understanding of science is so evolved that even trying to impart it on human beings, they're they just keep calling us sort of like the lowest strain of bacteria in the universe when it comes to what their sort of comprehension of knowledge is.
But that sounds like the Vogons from Hitchhikers, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
Just going to build an intergalactic highway, if you don't mind.
Yeah. James Jansen said there's some interesting pictures from the 15th century of comets that look like rockets in William Brambley book.
I'm assuming he's
Craig Allenson. Thank you, James. That's the author.
The Gods of Eden book, I assume. But there were, in religious paintings and woodcuts from the Middle Ages, you will get comets that do look like what we know as UFOs. I mean, some of them have little pilots in them as well.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's... I can't remember which one it is, but there's a famous painting with Jesus, I think, whether it's a crucifixion or whether it's something else. And you've got two comets coming in from either side, and each one's got a little pilot in there. Which, quite mad. And there's another one. I mean, these are all 15th, 16th century paintings. You will occasionally see a little UFO in the sky. And Tom DeLonge in The Guardian this weekend, he said, he proposed the theory that the Star of Bethlehem was a UFO.
It would make it, if that was the case, then the Passion of the Christ is actually probably more like Life of Brian in reality. But that's the thing with Tom DeLonge. I remember when, after he left Blink-182 and he pursued this career, he was slated big time, wasn't he?
He was, and he still is. But from within the UFO community as well now.
So what's your take on his work?
Well, the company that he started, To the Stars, Academy of Arts and Sciences, they want to push forward the conversation of UFOs and whether we're alone in the universe or not. And they want to do this through a few different mediums, whether it be TV series, comic books, fiction novels, non-fiction books, and research. I mean, there's a show called Unidentified, which is on the History Channel, which basically looks at the work that they're doing. And that's into its second season now. The second season, I think it's 3 episodes in the UK. I think there's another one either tonight or Saturday night.
Right.
But yeah, what they're doing is they've got Lou Elizondo, who headed up the ATIC program, which I mentioned earlier. He's a former Pentagon employee. You got Christopher Mellon, who was assistant he's got a long-winded title. He did have assistant secretary for the Department for Intelligence, or assistant deputy secretary for the Department of Intelligence, something like that. So these are people who have got the back in US government, and I think they just wanted this news out that there are things in our skies that we can't explain. So they started off. They made a couple of bad decisions early on. For example, during a press conference, they showed a picture of a first birthday Mylar balloon, one of the silver helium balloons. Yeah. They showed a picture of one of them and said, "Oh, this is what the UFO that buzzed the USS Nimitz looks like." And so that was met with, derision across all communities, because you just posted a picture of a birthday balloon and said it's a UFO.
Oh dear.
But they were one of the first ones to actively push this subject into an arena where it hasn't been before. The public are becoming more well informed about it, sorry. And it's actually going through the US Senate at the moment. It's been added to the intelligence bills. As of June this year, Senator Marco Rubio, who's the Florida senator for Florida, his argument to the Senate was, well, if these are craft coming into US airspace with impunity, then why how are they doing that? Why are they doing it? And why aren't we considering them a national threat?
Yeah.
I mean, are they a global threat? Are they a threat at all? That's up for debate, because they haven't really seemed threatening in any way. Or will they only become a threat to us when we become a threat to them?
Yeah, we're still in the kind of infancy when it comes to...
Oh, we're still in fire and sticks mode.
Yeah, we've... I was going to say we've supposedly been to the moon. Again, that's a whole different subject. I'm on the fence about that one. I have to admit, I've seen compelling arguments from both sides.
Yeah.
One against, especially some of the footage where you've probably seen it as well, where during sort of the bouncing along on the moon, and one of the guys falls over and he sort of literally rotates and bounce back up like he is on, if you are on a trapeze wire and you spin. Right. It just looks completely unnatural, even in that area of gravity.
Yeah, but we don't know what the conditions are on the moon.
True.
From a personal point of view, do we? That may have happened. It probably did.
Yeah.
It may not. But I personally believe that we did go. Well, the US went up there, mainly because Stanley Kubrick, who's often been mentioned as filming the moon landing on a sound studio in Nevada, he was always adamant that no, I had nothing to do with any filming whatsoever of any fake moon landing. And, his family is stuck by those words forever. And there's just too much evidence that we have been there. When you got the feed that we saw of the moon landing was actually a camera pointed at the screen in the control center. So we're not getting the actual feed from the footage. We're just seeing an image of that footage.
I remember seeing Neil deGrasse, like he's often talking about this subject, and I think it was he was talking with someone like Joe Rogan, and he was saying about how some of the footage looks slightly iffy, and Neil deGrasse Tyson's opinion was, he said, look, it is more likely that we went to the moon, but we lost some of the footage or had a breakdown of footage, so they replaced that with some reenacted footage, than we didn't go to the moon.
That's more likely than not going to the moon,
yeah. And that you could, with something that monumental, and especially with all the pressure from Russia and everything that was going on at the time, you could understand why a government would possibly do that, to try, and obviously you want to make as big an impact as possible with one of the greatest achievements that man has ever made.
Sure. I mean, it was 62 or 63 when JFK made that speech saying that we will be on the moon within the decade.
Yeah.
Well, by the end of the decade. Come to 1969, July, first foot on the moon. And, the Americans were really upset that the Russians had actually, A, put the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, B, had a man-made satellite orbiting the Earth, Sputnik. And, the Russians seemed well ahead of the Americans in the space race at the time, although both nations had failure after failure after failure, trying to get rockets that would, not blow up on the launch pad before they actually found a method that would work and propel, someone past the atmosphere. And then you got the whole argument about the Van Allen belt and the rate, whether, the human body can sustain that amount of radiation for that amount of time without any ill effects, or whether it would just burn up whatever craft we're flying in. I defer to the scientists on that, saying, yeah, we can go through it, no problem.
Yeah, because I remember hearing there was some debate saying that the quality of the suits and everything that we had at the time and the technology, they're saying that we'd struggle to get through it now. I think this was the argument.
I think that was mentioned in one press conference, and I think that's just been, someone picked that up and they've run with it, and they've passed it on to other people and they've run with it. I mean, it's true, the power of the computers that took us, took the Apollo mission to the moon wouldn't even power the phone on your desk anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that is incredible. The fact that, you can hold a more powerful computer in your hand than a whole room of them back in the 1960s.
Yeah. Right, we've had a few comments. From Jeremy, UFO sightings seem to come during times of threat or struggle for humanity, nuclear testing during World War II and more now. Could it be a warning or someone watching over us?
Well, there's always the argument that we didn't really start seeing UFOs until the nuclear bomb testing in White Sands, Nevada in the 40s, when Oppenheimer was part of the Manhattan Project. Before we dropped the big one, before they dropped the big one on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. People seem to think that when we started detonating nuclear bombs, that sent off a little alarm somewhere in the galaxy, saying, hang on a minute, something's going on in that quadrant, we better go and investigate.
But then would that be supported, though, from obviously historical documentation or supposed documentation all throughout history?
Well, you got the Vimanas of the Hindu scriptures, which were described as flying boats with people, people in them. The Japanese have similar myths of craft coming down, speaking to people. You've got the airships of the 1800s. This is before Montgolfier and his hot air balloon,
right?
And before the Wright brothers, before the Zeppelins, things like that. People were seeing airships in the sky. No one knew what they were. There was an occasion in Lyon in France in the Middle Ages where a craft landed, the occupants got out, said they were from the future, and the local priest had to basically protect them from the local villagers who were intent on stringing them up and burning them as witches.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
We've come to warn you guys. Right, so we'll kill you.
Yeah. It's like burn first, ask questions later.
Yeah.
But you got the Ezekiel's wheel in the Bible. It was a wheel within a wheel. You had winged men on there. Enoch, the biblical Enoch, he was supposed to be one of the first alien abductees. Elijah, the prophet Elijah, he was also supposed to have had conversations with extraterrestrials. Jesus went missing for 13 years, whether he went to India or whether he went somewhere else. You've also got when he came, after the crucifixion and he went up to heaven, was that him being taken on board?
Oh, no, he went over to America, remember, because of Mormonism.
But that wasn't until the 1890s. So he had time in between to chill out and read up on a few things.
Yeah. He'd broadened his horizons when it came to having multiple women in your life. We've also had James Jansen say there have been reports of UFOs shutting down nuclear testing places. They say they didn't have the technology. Oh, also he says they didn't have the technology in the film industry to fake it.
The moon landing he's talking about. Yeah, no way. But yeah, nuclear bases are interesting, very interesting, because there's been a few cases recently of drones being filmed. Drones appearing over nuclear bases in America. Which has got powers that be all het up over there at the moment. But you got things like Malmstrom Base in Malmstrom. It's over on the west side of America. I can't remember what state it's in. But there were some guards on the gates, on the sentry gates there, and they saw a craft come in, hover above them. There was red lights. The nuclear warning started going off. There was also the nuclear bombs were armed as well, if I recall correctly. So yeah, in a nuclear base, if you want to arm a nuclear missile, you need a couple of people to be able to do it. You need different security keys, different passes, different codes. Apparently these bombs aren't by themselves, and they were minutes or seconds away from being launched towards Russia, because every American nuclear silo was aimed towards Russia in the 60s.
Yeah.
And apparently the same thing happened in Russia as well. They think it's the other side that's doing it to them. They've got greater technology than you have to be able to do this. So the Russians are thinking it's America, America thinking it's the Russians, and it's neither of them.
I remember watching a documentary and they were talking about the like the codes and everything for the nuclear warheads in America, and they said that the technology there is so outdated. This was a while ago. That I think it was the launch codes and everything was still kept on floppy disk or something along those lines.
It wouldn't surprise me, but why would you need to update it?
Well, in case
if it's on a floppy disk, that's a medium which very few people have access to these days. So why not keep them on a floppy disk?
Well, if you lose your floppy disk or it gets scratched.
Oh yeah, I mean they went wrong all the time. Stick a magnet there, and that's it. It's wiped.
Exactly. Well, it's a good thing in a way, I suppose, because at least then if you lose your codes, then you can't fire your missiles, can you? Everyone's happy.
No, that's good. If you put a Perspex cover over the red button, Trump can't push it either.
Just got visions of him just scrabbling at it. Make it work. So, okay, make it work. But actually, sorry, carry on.
Sorry. Talking about the nuclear bases, the most recent episode of Unidentified on History Channel deals with that subject.
I'll have to check that
for the 45 minutes it's on. Yeah, it's really good actually.
Because Sorry, carry on.
Well, I was going to say there's Roswell. The Roswell Air Force Base was the home of. Well, it's where the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima originated from. They were flown out of there originally before they went off to Japan and the Enola Gay and all that.
I didn't know that.
But Roswell, I mean, people think that's why that's always had a lot of activity around the area because of the historical importance of that base. But whether something crashed, that is still up for debate. There's been, all the people who were there at the time slowly dying off. I think there's a handful of people, grandchildren of someone who's there.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, something did happen. Whether any of that material was actually retrieved is still unconfirmed. Whether there were bodies, that's still unconfirmed. About 20 years ago, there was some footage that came out of an alien autopsy. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
It was kind of on a Channel 4 special over here, I think.
Yeah, I remember various people doing sort of spoofs of it. I think even Anton Deck did a spoof of it.
Yeah, Anton Deck made a film about the guys who faked the footage. Yeah,
that's it. Yes, I remember.
It was a guy called Ray Santilli who he was in cahoots with somebody else. This other person claimed to have had actual footage from the day or the night of the Roswell crash, when they were taken to Roswell Air Force Base and then on to Fort Worth in Texas. And this guy claimed to have actual footage of autopsy, but the footage was damaged, so he'd had to recreate it. And this was something that Ray Santilli was shown, so then he recreated it as well.
Right.
Made it more presentable, and tried to sell it as authentic. Which he made a few bucks out of it, I guess.
That's the thing when it comes to footage, actually. Is a very good segue. Well done. The thing is, so when you go back, say, within the last sort of 60, 70 years, when photography and the ability to take photos was nowhere near as accessible as it is now. But all the photos are same with like paranormal photos as well. They always seem to be a bit grainy, not the greatest quality. But now, but that's where the majority of our sort of evidence seems to come from my limited knowledge. But considering that everybody and their dog now has a walking, a camera in their pocket, there doesn't seem to be any sort of, and again on the paranormal front as well, there doesn't seem to be any photos. There may well be, they just haven't been brought to my attention.
Well, no, it's because everybody's looking down at them. No one looks up anymore. They're just staring at their feet. It's like the shoegazers of the 90s. They're with a phone in front of you instead.
Yeah, I'll look up there. I can't. Someone's just posted a picture of a dessert they've just had. Okay, then. Yeah.
But there are videos that come out. But the thing is, with computer software technology as well, programs like Photoshop, it's very easy to fake footage as well, which is the problem. You have to try and discern which is genuine, which is fake, which is a Chinese lantern, which is an aircraft coming towards you, so you can't really necessarily see all the navigation lights on it. Obviously, the big one, the planet Venus.
Yeah.
You know, or Jupiter or Mars at its closest proximity to Earth. But it is definitely an argument that, oh, you know, where's the footage? Where's the pictures?
Yeah.
If you think when you're walking along, you see something in the sky that you can't explain, you're just going to watch it. You're not thinking, oh my God, there's something in the sky. We're just going to try and quick on these pictures, check.
I don't know.
You're just going to be watching it for a bit. I bet if that happened to you at that very moment, you wouldn't be going into your pocket looking for your phone. You'd just be going, what is that?
I don't know. I'm a bit of a sucker for a something, especially something in the sky. I'll be like, oh, right, where's my phone? And what will happen is it will have gone by the time I've fannied about and actually managed to...
Yeah, that's the other thing. Or it's gone up so high that it just looks like a seagull.
Yeah.
Something like that. But with ghosts as well, if you see a ghost, what are you going to do? You're going to stand there and take it out of your pocket, or are you going to be running back the other direction?
Yeah, you're just going to be filling your pants and just standing there in sheer terror. Yeah, very good point. But you would have thought also with things like dash cams as well, you know, things that are... well, that's how that meteorite, wasn't it? Was it in Russia, in Siberia? No.
The green streak across the sky. Security cams, dash cams, they're probably some of the best records of footage. I mean, there's plenty of security camera footage of the paranormal. There was one a couple of weeks ago on a building site in Birmingham. One of the security guards there saw what looked like a woman in a bridal dress walking through this construction site.
Hen night.
When he went to have a look. Sorry?
Hen night, probably.
In Birmingham, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, he went. I mean, this construction site all gated off. You know, no one could have really gone in there, especially not a woman in a white dress.
Yeah.
It was a long white dress as well, so he went to go and check, and when he got there was nothing, and he just stayed in his hut for the rest of the night because he was shit scared. Which, you would.
Yeah, I think you can... We all like to think that we'd go and investigate and we'd all be like Fred from Scooby-Doo, but no, we'd all be like Shaggy and just actually crap ourselves.
His armchair bravado almost.
Yeah. Something I did want to talk about actually on the subject of UFOs was obviously the abduction whole idea, because that's probably would you say that's just as big or even bigger, the whole alien abduction, than the actual concept of UFOs in the sky?
It's a whole different kettle of fish. It's related, but the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. I mean, people will have will claim to have memories of being abducted. You know, they'll see a bright light coming through the window. Next thing you know, they wake up, they can't move, and these 3 or 4 little grey beings with these big black almond eyes are taking them out the window. Just recently called Somewhere in the Sky, by a guy called Ryan Sprague. He's from New York, and he has gone around America talking to people who say they've been abducted and getting their stories from kind of the emotional, humane kind of view. So rather than just taking a documented report, oh, you claim this happened,
yeah,
he's examining the effect on them, the effect it had on their families, the effect it had on their lives. And it's a really interesting, almost human case study into these people who say they've had these experiences and how it's affected them, how it's affected their outlook on their life as well as life in general.
Is there a similar psychology and a certain mental makeup that goes along with these kind of people who claim to have been abducted?
Not really. I mean, the famous cases, you're talking about Betty and Barney Hill in the 1960s. They were a mixed-race couple on their way back from Toronto, I think, and they saw a light following them as they were driving towards Portsmouth in New Hampshire. And they stopped and got out, and Barney Hill took a look. He got his binoculars out, had a look through it, got pretty freaked out, so he carried on driving down the road. And they then found themselves a few hours later coming into a nearby town where they pulled up, sat down at a diner for breakfast. And they had no previous memory of the previous 3 or 4 hours. They started having memories, flashbacks. They eventually got hypnosis. It's all down in a book called Interrupted Journey.
Right.
Which was written in the 70s. There was also a TV movie in America based on that book, which starred James Earl Jones as Barney Hill.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's 1975, so this is 2 years before he was the voice of Vader. And their story became really famous because it was the first kind of documented case of alien abduction.
Right.
Real documented case. I mean, there'd been others before, but this kind of hit a note, and then other people started coming forward saying, yeah, something similar happened to me. I mean, you do get the kind of sheep mentality. Oh, that sounds like a good story. I'll say that happened to me as well.
Yeah. But
it's the cases like that, and Travis Walton, who was a forester in Snowflake, Arizona, in 1975. He and his logging crew were going down the road after a day shift. Saw a light in the forest, stopped the truck. They all wondered what it was. Travis got out, went to examine it. Well, went to see what it was. This thing shot a bolt of energy towards him, knocking him off his feet. His crew thought he was dead, so they scarpered, went down to town. Just left him there. And then 5 days later, he turns up phoning his brother from a nearby phone box. Now, he claimed his story is that bolt of energy threatened his life so much that he was taken on board that craft. Sorry, and they actually saved his life. But then he turns up 5 days later with no memories. And then they start coming back to him, and he's one of the best known abduction cases, but he's also one of the most genuine.
Right.
Because he wasn't the kind of person to make this kind of stuff up. He was 20 odd years old. He's got all his logging mates who all saw the UFO at the time. These lights in the forest. And they didn't see him from the point where he got hit by this energy bolt to when he turned up later that week. So if you've seen the movie Fire in the Sky, which was in the 1990s, that is based on his account.
All right.
And that was probably one of the first films that scared the living shit out of me as well.
I'll have to check that one out, I think.
Yeah. Flashback.
Because one of the issues I have when they say they, and I think it's a thing with hypnosis as well, because hypnosis can be very suggestive, and it's quite easy to, I think from I've listened to various people talk about hypnosis, and they say that because it's very suggestive, it doesn't always give a fair representation of what a person experienced. Sometimes it's what they perceived happened, or their subconscious perceives that's happened to them. So it's not always a clear, sort of cut, defined answer of what somebody went through. That's why I always struggle that there can be with hypnosis. It's not the most reliable way, I don't think.
It's not. I mean, the idea of hypnosis is to try and access the deeper subconscious. Memories that you've probably hidden away because they were too terrifying for you.
Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely cases of, investigators and, people leading those hypnosis sessions, leading the abductee on, or, the case or the patient on. So they're trying to plant these images into their minds, just to get a story out of it, which is complete rubbish.
Yeah.
But But then you do get genuine cases. You know, they call them screen memories, whether these memories have been implanted by those who are doing the abduction, because they don't want you to know what's going on, or whether the human psyche has made up its own cover story, like your brain's covering up for you.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't want you to remember this terrifying ordeal that you've just gone through.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with the human mind is it's one of those things, and especially over time, doesn't it? When they were talking about there's I can't remember. There's a book, I think it might be by somebody called it might be by Simon Singh. It's called like Your Deceptive Brain or something along those lines. And it talks about the fallibility of the human mind, so how it's biased towards certain things, how it will, especially when it comes to recounting stories as time goes on, the actual, even like a couple of weeks after an event, your recollections can dramatically change. A classic example was a woman who she witnessed the assassination of JFK, and at the time they interviewed her, and she said, I didn't really see much of it. I was, quite back from the crowd, but I was there, kind of thing. And then years later, they re-interviewed her, and in that time, she had witnessed it firsthand. She was right up the front. She saw the bullets hit him. Everything had changed. Yeah. So there's, again, when it comes to these kind of stories, there is so much fallibility when it just comes to human recollection that it's very difficult, I think, and especially also the human tendency to over-exaggerate and also try and create a good story as well. So it does tend to sort of get in the way. Yeah. Well, it's like most things in life, isn't it? Kind of the masses kind of ruin it for the few. Yeah,
or the few ruin it for the masses.
Or whichever way around.
But you got the left brain and the right brain. That old theory where the left brain is more analytical, it's more structured, it needs absolute clarity, where the right brain will just, is free to wander.
Yeah.
Probably more accepting into some of these ideas. Forgot where I was going with that.
It's all right. Welcome to my world.
But there's two other famous abduction cases. One is Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, which was also a film starring Christopher Walken. And he was in a woodland cabin over Christmas in upstate New York, and he got abducted over a number of nights, affected his life forever. I mean, he's still around now, and he's still into the UFO subject, and he's written a load of books, as his own radio show as well. But he was abducted every time he kind of went to this cabin in the woods. He'd always see these lights flooding through the windows in the house first, usually when he was asleep. The perfect time, the optimal time, sorry, not optimal, not perfect. There's a certain time of the night where these things seem to happen, and that's usually between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. Quite an hour, but it's that kind of thing where no one's quite explained why it seems to happen at that time of night.
To play devil's advocate, though, could you not also sort of say that at that point of the night, obviously, maybe people are in the sort of deepest sort of realm? Are they? Yeah. Is it the sort of time where you're more likely to dream? If a person is sleeping from a typical, say, 11 o'clock. So from 11 o'clock, from sort of say 11 till 7, around that kind of time. So you're not far off. You're just over halfway through your sleep cycle.
Yeah, I mean, you got different sleep states: the alpha state, the beta state, the delta, and the zeta states. And I think it's around that time of night that your subconscious starts kicking in, and it's more perceptive to things going on around you. So perhaps you do experience other things, but it always seems to be around those hours where these things happen. Sleep paralysis is another one.
Oh yes.
No one's quite explained sleep paralysis, but people just wake up, they can't move, that scares them. and then they think they see beings around the bed, which terrifies them even more. Now, one thing that's always been said about sort of alien abductions or encounters with, extraterrestrials, if they do happen, is that it's that element of fear which allows them to control you.
Well, that's an interesting point, because when we were talking about, obviously, the way human brains perceive things, especially when it's sort of in a, I suppose you could call it a vulnerable state, couldn't you? Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis?
Yeah, a few times.
Yeah.
More than a few times, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've experienced it twice, and one, it was a really, really bizarre sensation, but it was very interesting of how my brain geared itself towards a certain idea. It was in the dream I was just looking around my room, and all of a sudden a red veil descended.
Right.
And for some reason, it's the most cheesy line I could ever possibly have said in a dream. I actually said, "Get behind thee, Satan." Class. It was brilliant. You couldn't write it.
Right.
And that was when I felt something literally rising up my body. And once it passed my head, I woke up, I shot out of bed, flew downstairs. This was probably about kind of 7 a.m. And I was convinced that there was something in my room. So for some reason, my mind automatically, even though I'm not remotely religious, decided to go towards Satan and the paranormal. So again, it's your mind's kind of pre-programmed, determined ideas that it goes towards. It makes me wonder do these people, if they have a similar experience, is their brain geared more towards aiming it at that kind of thing?
It's possible, but the varied spectrum of people who are actually experiencing these kind of things, you can't pinpoint it to a certain type of person.
Right.
They might be religious, they might be atheist. You might get an atheist screaming out in the middle of it, Jesus Christ, and then everything, suddenly they'll
get behind
feel they can move with that. Yeah. That is from many abduction cases, that is probably, those two words do seem to ward off whatever is happening.
Yeah.
People will evoke the name of Jesus and then everything's fine, which is bizarre, and I'm not really sure what to make of that one.
I would personally, of course, this is all just conjecture. I have no qualifications in any of this whatsoever, so I'm sure there are a million people in the world who could pull me down and ridicule me. But again, to me, it seems to be a sort of predetermined belief, maybe to pacify our brain at that time by taking it to a place where we feel safe, that by saying these words it will restore the balance or get rid of all the nasty evil things. It's just part of our brain's mechanism of coping with maybe just a subconscious dream state or something that we're dealing with at the time. But I think the ones that you've talked about and I think this goes for the paranormal as well, it's people just saying they've experienced something. You can take them at their word, and it's all very well and good. But it's, again, when you have multiple people seeing the same thing, or with the paranormal, multiple people seeing at completely different times, without any contact with each other, seeing the same entity or the same apparition. There must be something to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think pop culture as well has a lot to do with it as well. Because if you think back to the 40s and 50s, everyone was talking about Little Green Man. And you have to think what was around that time. I mean, you had the Dan Dare comics in the 30s, which had Mekons who came from Mars and they were green. So, it's kind of little seeds that get put into your subconscious, which you kind of associate with what's going on with you at the same time. Then you had all the B movies of the 50s, and the Cold War was basically even though it was, between America and Russia for global domination, that kind of thing. there was always this kind of hidden threat of flying saucers in everybody's mind. So they saw a flying saucer, they thought it was the Russians, and then people start thinking, it's like McCarthyism. Everybody's a communist. Your next door neighbor's a communist, and then you see something in the sky, you haven't seen it before, or you live in the middle of nowhere and you've never seen a plane, and you think that's a flying saucer because you read comics.
Yeah.
Or you've heard your neighbour talk about it, or whatever, something like that. It's like what I was going back to before. The UFO kind of phenomenon seems to adapt to what we're, the kind of technological stage that humans seem to be in at that time. Because we had flying saucers around the 40s and 50s, just when we were kind of looking at flying cars.
Yeah.
There was a famous one, the Avro car from Canada, which, it was basically their attempt at a flying saucer, but
I've seen
didn't get off the ground, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some great inventions back there. I remember watching a documentary about all the failures that they had.
Oh, yeah. It was great. But you had the airships before airships and hot air balloons were around. There was the black triangle wave of the 1990s, which may have been the F-117 in some cases.
Yeah.
The stealth bomber that was actually tested in Nevada in the early 80s, before it was unveiled to the public in 88, and then obviously went to the Gulf War in the 90s. Recently, it's been like orbs of light, and these Tic Tacs from 2004, the Nimitz and the Princeton, those kind of events. So I think there's a theory that the UFO phenomenon, it kind of adapts to our conscious level. Where we think we are technologically, where we think we are, they're always kind of that one further step ahead. Because at the moment it looks like an IKEA stool, or like a beanbag, just this white Tic Tac flying through the air with these two little almost like stovepipes coming off the bottom of it.
Right.
But who knows? I can't really explain why pop culture has that effect on our minds, or why. Maybe it's because we want to see something that we are familiar with. We can relate it to something we've already seen.
But that's kind of what always, sort of, to me, feels like it throws a spanner in the works for the sort of the genuine quality of what people see. Because again, it's we see something and therefore we relate it to something that we're immersed in, surrounded in. So I think that's where you're more likely to get your misfires, so to speak, because we're just relating to what we know. But no, I mean, there's again, it's a tricky one. Oh, James Jansen just said, I read a book by the Warrens. 2 a.m. is peak paranormal time.
Oh yeah.
So, one after.
Yeah, the Warrens were obviously very famous paranormal investigators in the 70s.
So it's, that's 1 hour after the witching hour. So it's a busy time of morning. All shit's going on.
It's like rush hour.
Yeah. But it does sort of seem like what would be the, especially with the alien abductions and things like that. What is the purpose? To again play devil's advocate.
Some people think we're being studied. Some people think that these creatures are us from the future who've got severe DNA depletion, so they're kind of, hesitate to say the word stocking up, but they kind of need our present day DNA to somehow help them in the future, which makes very little sense, but that is one of the theories that are put forward. There's other theories like we're a petri dish, we're a zoo.
That's probably more accurate.
Yeah, we're just here for other species entertainment, a bit like Truman Show kind of thing. They might just be travelers from another world who are they might be galactic tourists. You see, there's a nice blue and green planet. I'll go and check that out. See what's happening down there.
Well, that's the thing with especially with the current technology we have and our understanding of the physics of the universe. The fact of the nearest galaxy, what was it? I was just trying to remember, and what they were saying about what the closest sort of habitable sort of planets that will look habitable in the Goldilocks zone and everything that they've discovered, and the actual distance that you would have to travel. Is it millions of years? Or however many...
Using our current technology,
yeah. So for what we know, it's unfeasible for anything within our solar system really to be able to reach us. But that's with what we know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our laws of physics are restricted by our laws of physics.
Yeah.
The guy I mentioned before, Miguel Alcubierre, his theory of faster than light travel was basically like the warp speed of Star Trek or light speed of Star Wars. You know, this is science fiction becoming almost science fact, where you actually grab a point ahead of you in time, pull that towards you while you're coming away from your point of origin. So it's almost...
Are we talking wormhole stuff here?
Yeah. So say at space, they pull that towards you, and then you're there, and then the two meet, and you're there in like seconds or minutes, or if it's a Star Wars film, you do all that crap in 24 hours. Yeah.
Because isn't there the idea of, obviously, with what we see from, say, distant stars and everything, obviously we're seeing the speed of light, so therefore... This has always been my kind of a query with this kind of thing. Again, I'm one of these people, I pick up bits of information. I'm a master of nothing. So I'm just a nitpicker. But obviously, the light from certain stars that we see now has taken so long to get to us that therefore the stars possibly aren't there anymore. Yeah. So therefore, if you were to travel to these points, does that mean technically you travel back in... As you're travelling at the speed of light, do you travel back sort of in time as you head towards... I remember hearing someone explain this to me, and it's kind of a bit of a brain fryer.
It is, and that's a conversation to be had over some exotic herbs.
Yes. We could just use the phrase man at the end of every sentence.
Yeah. I don't know. It is certainly possible. I mean, what we see in the sky may not be there anymore. I mean, scientists are seeing supernovas, seeing black holes swallow other black holes, cannibalistic galaxies, that kind of thing. So it is possible, but our generation will never find that out, I don't think.
No.
So if I'm not going to find it out, then I'm not going to worry about it.
So what is your... Because we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes already.
Oh.
It's not bad going. And I know like we haven't even barely touched on, as I said to everyone, go and check out the magazine. So it's a really well put together magazine. There's so many different subjects, all very interesting, covered in this. I've only just sort of scratched the surface when sort of looking at what you do for this interview, but I'll certainly be having a proper butcher's, I feel. But
yeah, I mean, what you were saying about, these craft coming from light years away, one thing that puzzles people is when these craft do come into our atmosphere, if they're so technologically advanced, why do they crash? Or why are they presumed to crash? I mean, Roswell is obviously the biggest one. There was a rumored one in Cape Girardeau in 1941 in Missouri. There was the Aztec crash as well, which I think was in 49, maybe in the 50s. But in the New York Times in June, 23rd of June, there was a piece that mentioned that the US government may have material from a craft not made of this earth.
Right.
So basically off-world materials that they've been studying. And in the UFO community, there was a big thing made about some leaked documents in last year, 2019. They're called the Wilson Davis notes.
Right.
This is basically a conversation between a well-renowned scientist in his field called Dr. Eric Davis and Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, I believe. And they basically had an off-the-record conversation about Admiral Wilson had got wind of certain projects within the US government, black projects hidden by other projects, hidden by other projects, hidden by other projects. So kind of like a Russian doll effect. And this, this UFO craft had supposedly been hushed up for decades. I mean, this was back in the 90s that this conversation allegedly took place. And this Admiral Wilson was upset that he wasn't allowed to see what was going on with this project, even though he had such a high level of clearance, higher than, with regards to certain projects, he probably had a clearance level higher than the president at the time, which would have been George W., I think.
We're talking sort of Independence Day kind of storyline here, aren't we, when you think of that kind of thing?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, but obviously not, no immediate threat of invasion. It's just crash materials like the debris.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But these notes related to a project that was ongoing, which was trying to reproduce this craft using Earth technology, its propulsion systems, which are supposedly anti-gravity or some other kind of field propulsion that we have no idea about yet, according to our laws of physics anyway.
Yeah.
And this Admiral Wilson, he was upset that he couldn't get clearance because of this clandestine company, and it was said that some of the big aerospace companies in America had access to different parts of the technology, and they were all working on it independently. No one knows what it's like the left arm doesn't know what the right arm's doing.
Yeah.
So how are you going to come together and make something work?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So he related all this to this Eric Davis, and this Dr. Eric Davis, he put it all down in, typed up all these notes just for his records, just so he had something back to refer to if he ever came across the project himself.
Yeah.
These were eventually leaked. One of the astronauts, Edgar Mitchell, who was a big proponent of UFOs and life from other planets, he had access to these notes, and he kind of let it slip to somebody else. But when these notes came out, I mean, there's still arguments going on about the validity of the documents and whether they relate to an actual conversation, because both parties have actually denied that it ever took place.
Okay.
Which it does say that they would do in these notes as well. I said, if you ever tell someone I spoke to you, I'm going to deny it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it's all kind of, people meeting in darkened rooms. It's almost X-Files, but a little bit higher than X-Files.
Yeah.
That kind of secret men in suits and high-ranking military officials. But all these projects were supposedly sent out to different corporations to try and work on different elements. And then obviously whether this was happening and included a guy called Bob Lazar or not has never been confirmed.
Oh, that's in one of your issues, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Bob Lazar is famous for basically telling the world about Area 51.
Right.
Back in 1989, he gave his story to a Las Vegas reporter called George Knapp. Because Bob Lazar, he was basically he was basically a genius at some levels.
Right.
He made a jet-propelled car in his teens and his early 20s. He had a strong knowledge of how things work. He built himself a jet-powered bike. He's built, he had a government contract dealing with nuclear elements. He's got a company called Nuclear Research Limited, or United Nuclear. And when he came out with his story, he claimed to have been working on one of these reproduction vehicles in Area 51 in this place called S4 out in the Nevada desert, a place called Groom Lake. And he claimed to have been brought in onto the project because they couldn't work out how these craft were supposed to work, what their propulsion system was. Apparently, the American secret special access projects, but these projects have been going on for so many decades, and their progress had been terminably slow.
Yeah.
Basically, we're restricted by our laws of physics, our terrestrial materials, our knowledge of chemistry, things like that. We don't know how to properly create anti-gravity in a vehicle, basically.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd see the hoverboards from Back to the Future 2, going down the street every day, which I'm sure every kid would have had during lockdown.
Yeah, the closest you're going to get to that is some kind of drone board. Well, that is around at the moment, isn't it? Various drone boards and...
Yeah, they are very close. But, I mean, this was 1989, and, these projects came out, and Bob Lazar was, he was a household name. I remember the news reports coming out when I was at high school. But then after he came out, all this was denied. His education was called into question. His persona was called into question. There's a documentary on Netflix called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, by filmmaker Jeremy Corbell, which is well worth a watch. Kind of tells the whole story, where Bob Lazar is now, and why he chose, 30 years later to come out and retell the story. Because he supposedly came away. I mean, he got fired for a couple of things, but the main thing was he would take a couple of friends of his. I mean, Area 51 at the time, it wasn't as large as it is now. I mean, they keep extending the fences every couple of years to stop people getting butchered. Yeah. But he took his friends up to a vantage point. And he said, right, every Wednesday they're testing these craft above the facility. So he took two of his friends, John Lear and Gene Huff. John Lear, by the way, was one of the most decorated CIA pilots in America. So he's, he can tell a plane from a seagull or something else. So he took his friends out and he said, right, Wednesday, 9 o'clock, or whatever the time was, you'll see these craft flying above the facility and they're testing them out, seeing what they can do. And he did this for like 3 weeks. And every time, something would happen in the air, they'd be watching this for a couple of hours. And it wasn't until they eventually got busted. Lazar got severely reprimanded and then eventually lost his job at the facility. And it was around that time, well, before he got kicked out, he was trying to bring the story to the world, because that kind of knowledge shouldn't be confined to this, this hangar built into a mountain. This is something that would benefit the whole of humanity.
Is that is that where, because obviously one of the main things about various countries and various governments is the fact of national security and all those kind of things. So do you think the thought process behind, if you had technology that was a massive step up from what you have now, would you want to introduce something like that into the world, even if it's on your side? Or would you want to sort of filter in? Because I would have thought generally you want to be ahead of the opposition, don't you? Yeah. So, but would you want to be so far ahead that they know that that you almost have to sort of, you can't, I suppose, palm it off as, well, we've just made these advances in technology ourselves. Because if it's such a vast jump, then people are going to question where that comes from. But which people have been doing since 1947. I mean,
if you think of all the advances in computing and technology since 1947, fiber optic cables, microwave ovens, lasers, things like that. And, computers have gone from huge rooms full of spools and wheels twisting around and flashing lights everywhere to, how big computers are now, like size of a phone. So there is always, you want to keep this technology to yourself.
Yeah.
Obviously, because you don't want the other person having technology of the same standard or a little bit better if you want a certain level of control. But if it was to benefit mankind, say it's free energy, would you want the global population to have access to free energy so we wouldn't have to pay for electricity, gas, oil?
Absolutely
like
not. Of course.
No, exactly.
No, as long as there's profit to be made, that's what I think with one of the reasons behind renewable energies, isn't it? People will, while there is money to be made, there is too much at stake. For the good of mankind never really comes into play throughout the whole of civilization.
No, I mean, it's changing a little bit these days. And you've seen, as the older guard kind of dies off, you are seeing a shift in the thought process where people are thinking, well, maybe we should be looking at these.
I think that's because we're more connected, aren't we, now, than we ever have been.
Yeah. But this To the Stars Academy, part of their media campaign, for want of a better word, is books. They have 4 books out under the Secret Machines label, 2 are fiction, 2 are non-fiction, and it's the fiction books. They're basically kind of investigating this technology. So the secret tests at a secret facility somewhere, usually Area 51 or Nevada or somewhere else. And they're trying to get like the best pilots to try and kind of work out how to fly these craft. But they can't really fly it in a physical manner as we understand.
Right.
So you haven't really got a joystick or anything like that. It's kind of done more on a conscious level.
Oh, okay.
You kind of plug yourself into the ship and then you kind of thinking, moving the ship with...
So kind of mental integration into it.
Yeah, almost. I mean, they're pretty good books. I mean, the non-fiction books deal with kind of man's experience with, we'll call it the phenomena, throughout history and how man has perceived it and interacted with it over the years. But there's just so much out there at the moment which deals with various different subjects. The Secret Machines books, good examples. A good place to start as an introduction to any of this would be a book called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind by a guy called Richard Dolan.
I was going to that was going to be my next question. Actually, what would you recommend for people who are interested in this subject? What avenues, if they were to pursue?
I mean, that would be.
Oh, you're frozen.
That'd probably be one of the first books because that'll give you.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, you just froze there. You are back in all your glory. Carry on.
Cool. UFOs for the 21st Century Mind just gives you a general overview of the UFO cases of, the past few decades, going back a bit further than that. Just trying to make sense of the subject. It's kind of like almost, I wouldn't say entry level, but it just gives you a broad overview. And Richard Dolan's a very knowledgeable guy. He's a historian by, he studies as a historian, so he kind of approaches it from that kind of angle. He's not one for speculation unless he can actually prove it.
Yeah.
And he's he was one of the ones actually who did a lot of work on these Wilson Davis notes, dissecting them and finding out their chain of custody and things like that.
Oh, okay.
I'd also recommend The Day After Roswell by Phillip Corso. Now, this book is controversial in as much that it deals with debris and supposedly material retrieved from the Roswell crash, which was distributed among various large corporations in America, so they could work out, how these different elements worked. So some would have gone to IBM. I think IBM's around. Some would have gone to Atlantic Bell. Some would have gone to Boeing or Lockheed, Northrop, places like that. Just so different. You just get different opinions on what that material is and how it can be used. Mm-hmm. In everyday life, and whether it's a benefit or whether it can be weaponized, or how we could replicate that material. Somewhere in the Skies, I've mentioned before. There's also a podcast called Somewhere in the Skies, which deals with that kind of thing. Witness reports of UFOs, abductions, UFO cases, interviews with some of the more prominent names on the scene, filmmakers, things like that. I also recommend another podcast called That UFO Podcast, that only started up during lockdown, and that's done by a Scottish guy called Andy McGrillen. And that's well worth a look at because he speaks to most of the people from, say most of thousands. He speaks to a few of the people from the USS Nimitz incident, the 2004 series. Talking with the engineer, he's talking with the radar operator, he's talking with, people who were there at the time, and they're describing exactly what was going on. With regards to Roswell, possibly Witness to Roswell is a very good book, because it kind of gets the story from the townspeople. Right. People who were there, people who saw what was going on, people who knew the rancher who found it, Mac Brazel. People who work with the fire department, the radio, people who work with the radio show, people who worked at the Air Force Base. The Secret Machines books, very good. I'd also recommend Majestic by Willie Stryber, which is supposedly a fictional account of a Department of Defense guy who took one of the, assuming that there were bodies at the Roswell crash. Majestic deals with this guy taking one of these bodies that survived and then looking after it, keeping it under, in custody, so to speak. For a few number of years, getting to know it, trying to communicate, things like that. And that's a good yarn. If it's, it might be truth through fiction, it might not. Yeah. I'd also recommend, there's a British investigator and researcher called Timothy Good. His books Beyond Top Secret and Above Top Secret were fairly big in the 1990s. I had them at the time, and that deals with things like the Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980. The possibility that there was a base under Rudloe Manor, which I think is outside Marlborough, Wiltshire. But yeah, there's loads of books from the 1950s which document the US Air Force pilots' interactions with flying saucers. Major Donald Kehoe was a prolific author. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he wrote a couple of books in the 1970s, but he was part of Project Blue Book. If you want to go for a more consciousness kind of approach to it, or a different view, kind of associating it with possibly the myths and legends of elves, fairies, little people, that kind of thing. Then a guy called Jacques Vallée. He's written some good stuff about that. Probably one of the best writers out there at the moment. Well, I say at the moment, he's 80. But his book, Passport to Magonia and Wonders in the Sky, are two very good books, which, explore the subject from a different kind of point of view. And they go back through historical cases, through medieval times, biblical times, ancient Egypt, Romans. The UFOs have been seen everywhere. It's a global phenomenon that's, that's appeared throughout time.
Yeah. What we'll probably do, if would be all right with you, is after the stream's finished and during the week, if you would, for anybody who's interested in this, obviously check out your online magazine, which is the first port of call that everybody should go to. But if you would send us an email, a bunch of links of various books and things to check out, I can put them in the description of the video. So it sounds like you're a very well-read chap. So it sounds like
you used to be, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got quite a lot of good recommendations for people who sort of really want to explore this.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to have me on the show. I mean, this is a subject that is not broached with any degree of seriousness in the UK media. Well, it's always done with sniggers about little green men, tinfoil hats. And if it's on the telly, then there's always the X-Files theme in the background.
Yeah.
But I am teaming up with a couple of people to set up a kind of like a media hub for people who are interested in this subject, where we're going to collate confirmed and just confirmed information about the subject, where people can, if they want to find out more, they can visit the website, which will be up, I don't know, within a month or so. And it's also going to be a spot for any journalists. UK journalists don't necessarily have an interest in the subject, number one. And if they, because of that, they don't necessarily know where to turn to if a news story like that's appeared in the New York Times comes out. They don't have the requisite knowledge to report on it with any seriousness without rewriting what's already been written.
Yeah.
So me and a couple of others are going to start up this hub where we hope that the UK media, whether it be, online publishing or broadcast media, will, find the relevant information that they want and, want that, we're just aiming to distribute clear and concise material rather than speculation and conspiracy theories.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? To be honest, with any subject, is I know people would say sort of keep an open mind, but that works in some contexts, not in others, I find. But I think if people can give a good argument and present compelling evidence, then I think most things should be at least analysed, look at as many different, with any subject, look at as many different avenues as you can, explore as many different sort of evidence bases that you can, obviously make your own decision at the end of the day. But with something that's been going on for so long throughout history, seen by so many people, again, whatever the phenomenon is, there is something to it. We may not know exactly what it is, but at least, as you say, if you've got decent evidence, sort of accounts from from decent quality witnesses.
Yeah,
that's kind of
military witnesses are probably among the best because they are trained to observe anything unusual.
Yeah.
Radar operators, if someone's flying across your radar screen at like 3,000 miles an hour, you're gonna want to report that.
Yeah, if you sort of go,
that's not one of yours. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very compelling, and to think that we are the only beings in the universe. I think at this point in time, I don't think you can, with any credence, say that we are alone in the universe.
No, it's an ignorant statement. Basically, just you're playing up to your own ego if you think that. And to be honest, if humans are the most intelligent things in the universe, and that is probably the most depressing thing that they could be.
Well, the behaviour in the coronavirus outbreak has pretty much showed if that's the case, the universe is screwed.
Pretty much. And, bring on the intergalactic highway.
Oh, God, yes. But, Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. So,
it's been great. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get to Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, mate, this is one of those things that I've got several guests that I'd like to have back on, because we've barely... This isn't even the tip of the iceberg. This is the small seagull sitting on top of the iceberg just looking around at things. We haven't even scratched below the surface. So it'd be really cool sort of some point in the hopefully near future to have you back on, and then we'll sort of go through some of the other cases. And if people in the meantime would like to check out your magazine, so the links are, you can't see it at the moment, but the links are at the bottom of the broadcast for people who want to go and investigate. But definitely love to have you back on. And
it'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I'd also recommend Phenomena magazine as well,
cool,
which is another magazine in the UK. But that's also free.
Oh, brilliant.
Which the information's out there, so why not share it?
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could charge for it, but that's unfortunately the world we live in.
Yeah. Well, never mind.
All right, Dave.
But hey, I do it because I want to do it, and I want to learn while I'm doing it. So, why not?
Well, same reason I do these interviews. I don't know anything from it. I'm just really interested in people's stories and what they have to say. Excellent.
No, it's been great speaking with you, mate.
All right, brilliant, mate. Right, so everyone, check out Dave's work. So the links are at the bottom of the stream there. You can see. So we've got www.shadowsmagazine.co.uk and twitter.com/shadowsmagazine. And I'll be speaking to Dave during the week if he can email me some links to other things you can check out. And just thanks to everyone who tuned in and for the comments. It's been really, really interesting. So thank you very much, dear boy.
No problem.
All right, mate.
See you later.
See you later. Take care.